Welcome to today's episode, where we discuss the marriage between the green energy transition and oil markets, and more closely examine battery metals as a fundamental driver of this relationship. The energy transition towards cleaner energy sources and fuels is as much about the evolving role of oil as it is about the rise of renewables and other technologies, policies, and socio-economic drivers. Various supermajors and data providers expect oil demand to peak at different times and for different reasons. For instance, many cite petrochemicals as sustaining oil demand growth well into the 2030s. What we can reasonably expect is that oil demand will peak within the next 3 decades. The famed 2-degree scenario, the global community's accepted limitation of temperature growth to avoid significant and potentially catastrophic changes to the planet, is unlikely to be reached. The data points towards humanity exceeding this in the foreseeable future, with 10 billion global inhabitants and growing per capita consumption only scratching the surface, unless more drastic changes take place in the coming years. Some topics to watch, and which we plan to investigate in more depth in future editions, include: Number 1. Hydrogen economics. Most hydrogen is currently produced from fossil fuels with carbon capture, utilization and storage, also known as CCUS. Number 2. Global distribution of clean energy investment. According to the IEA, only 20% of clean energy investment occurs in emerging developing economies, excluding China, despite containing 2/3 of the global population. Number 3. Carbon intensity of crude production. Different fields and operators will produce different quantities of carbon emissions per barrel of crude oil produced due to factors such as transporting via trucks versus rail versus pipelines versus ships versus other methods, flaring, methane leakage, refining efficiencies, etc. And their abilities to 1. Offset, 2. Reduce, 3. Substitute, and 4. Remove carbon. Number 4. Electric vehicle penetration and its impacts on fuels. Sales of electric cars doubled in 2021 to 6.6 million. Number 5. National energy policy mandates. The EU is now legally obligated to reduce their emissions by at least 55% by 2030, for instance. And finally, number 6. Supply chain security of battery metals. Many critical battery metals, such as lithium and nickel, are sourced from politically unstable regions with uncertain reserves. Now let's talk more about battery metals. I remember frantically searching for AA batteries as a kid, under sofas, inside cupboards, at the back of messy kitchen drawers. Everywhere my miniature hands could get into. This was when they were crucial ammunition for almost everything remotely powered, including TV remotes and video game console controllers. I felt mild guilt for using so many batteries, which could only be used once, then had to be thrown away. Little did I know that behind the questionably innocent face of the Duracell bunny, there were at least 90 million tons of lithium reserves globally and counting. And this was only one of the many metals used in batteries and energy. There is a general consensus among consumers and governments that we have an urgent need to curb carbon emissions from road transportation, with battery-powered electric vehicles paving the way towards achieving this goal. To produce these vehicles, there is a requirement for mining and processing metals on a massive scale. Nickel, in particular, is essential for battery storage, and the International Energy Agency estimates that 80 million tons of nickel must be mined by 2040 to meet climate targets, more nickel than has ever been mined. The Clarion-Clipperton Zone, a deep seabed area in the Pacific Ocean, holds an enormous amount of nickel, together with cobalt, copper, and manganese. However, the rules governing seabed mining, overseen by the International Seabed Authority, have faced delays due to bureaucracy and concerns from conservationists. The concerns raised by conservationists include environmental risks, such as carbon emissions and damage to ecosystems caused by sediment plumes. However, it can be argued that these concerns are unfounded. Research suggests that seabed mining in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone would have minimal impact on carbon emissions and sediment spread. The most significant concern relates to the potential threat to unknown organisms in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, although life in the area is limited and mostly microbial. In comparison, mining for nickel on land, particularly in countries like Indonesia, would result in the destruction of a substantial amount of living organisms and higher emissions. Given the pressing need for nickel and the destructive environmental consequences of land mining, cautious yet expedited action is generally regarded as necessary. Finalizing the rules for offshore mining as soon as possible, while closely monitoring the impact on the environment and seeking alternatives that require less nickel in the long term, would contribute to a cleaner planet with richer biodiversity. Jumping back on land, Chile has the largest lithium supply, followed by Australia, Argentina, China, and the US. How many years can these reserves sustain current demand? Assuming an annual demand of 0.72 million metric tons, roughly 125 years. However, these numbers will undoubtedly change with rapidly increasing demand and potentially new reserves being discovered. The electrification of everything is coming, and with this, the clean energy transition, requiring vast amounts of metals. By 2040, the demand for minerals from clean energy technologies is projected to at least double in most research institutions' base case scenarios. The key sectors where battery metals play an increasingly pivotal role are as follows. Firstly, electric vehicles, EVs, and transportation. Secondly, battery storage for electricity, helping to balance power grids as they become increasingly reliant on intermittent renewable power generation. Thirdly, renewable energy assets from solar and wind to hydro and geothermal. The construction, repairs, and renovations of these energy-producing assets will require metals. The dominant minerals in terms of weight for mineral demand in 2040 are graphite, copper, and nickel. Lithium exhibits the fastest growth rate. The shift towards lower cobalt chemistries for batteries helps limit the growth in cobalt, with nickel taking its place. Metals producers are going to great lengths, deep at sea and deep in the wilderness of lesser developed states, such as many found in Central Africa and Southeast Asia, to access reserves and fulfill demand. Electricity networks contribute significantly to mineral demand, accounting for 70% of the current mineral demand from energy technologies. However, their share is expected to decrease as EVs and storage technologies experience rapid growth. Mineral demand from low-carbon power generation, such as wind power and solar PV, is set to increase rapidly. Mineral demand from these sources is projected to at least double by 2040. Wind power plays a leading role in driving demand growth due to capacity additions and higher mineral intensity, while solar PV follows closely. The growth of hydrogen, if this becomes a scalable technology, leads to increased demand for nickel, zirconium, copper, and platinum group metals. Nickel and zirconium are used in electrolyzers, while copper and platinum group metals are used in fuel cell electric vehicles. We believe there will be significant growth in these sectors over the next 2 decades, so long as the global economic growth machine continues churning and policy mandates continue their pro-energy transition trends. Thanks for listening. You can follow our podcast here for updates on new episodes or subscribe to our written insights for free at commoditylabs.substack.com. Thanks for listening.